What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you your favorite weekly series, the Pokemon Card Auctions of the Week recap. Folks, I have an amazing recap for you. In today's video, we'll be discussing the rise in the Celebrations Metal Pikachu and Charizard cards have been doing very well this past week, and we'll also be looking at a ton of Black Label cards as well as some amazing Charizard sales. So thank you so much for tuning in. As always, you're not going to want to miss today's episode. Before we get into today's recap, folks, I wanted to tell you about the upcoming 100% Pokemon card auction block happening this Sunday, May 4th on fanaticscollect.com. This auction block, folks, is perfect for anyone looking to pick up PSA, CGC, or BGS graded Pokemon cards ranging from Pop 1 Shining Grails to extremely affordable slabs. There is a great variety with hundreds of cards up for grabs, featuring more Shining cards, Crystal cards, Gold Star cards, and cards from pretty much every generation of the Pokemon TCG. There are also special items up for sale, including autographed cards and graded booster packs. So go check it out, folks. A direct link to this auction block will be in the description of this video, and you checking it out supports the channel tremendously, so thank you so much for checking it out. Alright folks, auction recap time. Let's get started off with this lot of 10 sealed Van Gogh Pika promo cards that sold for a total of $3,300. So that would be about $303 per promo. Never ceases to amaze me, this card. And then we saw the PSA 10 Gold Medal Pikachu card from Celebrations that sold for $2,550 this week, along with the Gold Medal Charizard card also from Celebrations and also in PSA 10 that sold for $3,551. And if you're not familiar with the market, the PSA 10 Pikachu was typically selling for around $1,000, and the Charizard was more like $2,000. So yeah, we have seen a significant increase on both of these cards from Celebrations. What do you think about them? Up next, we have this Ace 10 Umbreon VMAX from Evolving Skies. We don't see a lot of Ace cards come through in these auction recaps. This one here sold for $1,610. And then we saw a BGS 10 Black Label Japanese Umbreon VMAX that sold for $7,667 big ones this week. We also saw this Black Label Umbreon GX from Hidden Fates that sold for $5,101, along with this Japanese Black Label Giratina V that sold for $5,900. Even more Black Labels came through, such as this Team Skull Grunt Pikachu as a BGS 10 Black Label sold for $9,900, along with this Black Label Charizard Poncho Pikachu that sold for $14,600. Woo! What a way to start this recap off. Some big numbers, folks. And some more Black Labels. Here is a Black Label Charizard V from Champion's Path. Sold for $2,551. Here is the Black Label Charizard GX from Hidden Fates that sold for $4,064. And then the Charizard VMAX, also from Champion's Path, got the Black Label and sold for $2,027 this week. Here we have a PSA 10 Flareon EX from the Generations Radiant Collection that sold for $3,850. We saw several more cards from the XY era. Here is a Mega Sceptile EX from Ancient Origins that sold for $711. Here is a PSA 10 Dragonite EX Full Art card from Furious Fists that sold for $3,803. Here is a Mega Charizard EX from Flashfire. This is the number 69 copy, not the secret rare version. But this one here sold for $1,425. And then we saw the secret rare version here sell for $5,877. And if you don't know, there is not much of a difference between the secret rare version and the number 69 copy. They look pretty identical, but the prices are not so much. From the XY base set, we saw this Full Art Xerneas EX, a card we never see come by, especially in the PSA 10, sold for $2,350 this week. We saw two Primal Kyogre EX cards from Ancient Origins. This one here sold for $1,726. The other one sold for $1,751. So, pretty darn close there. Here we have the Charizard EX Black Star promo from the XY era. Sold as a PSA 10 for $2,026.79. And then we saw 3 base set Charizard reprints. Here is the Staff variant from Evolutions in PSA 10, very low pop card, sold for $10,700. Here is the Corporate History Creatures deck Charizard, sold as a PSA 9 for $14,850. And then we saw this PSA 9 autographed Zard from the Corporate History deck that sold for $21,100. Woo, this recap is making me sweat with some of these numbers, and we're just getting started, folks. Up next from Black and White Legendary Treasures is this full art Reshiram that sold for $3,051. And that's an impressive price, folks, but I do not like this card. You can hardly tell what's going on in it with the all gold coloring. I don't know, don't like it, but like I said, very nice price. Getting into the vintage portion, we saw a couple of cards from the Topps Chrome series. Here is a Flareon Sparkle card in PSA 10 that sold for $3,177, while the Techno version sold for $3,466. Here we have a first edition Nidoking from base set, graded a PSA 10 and sold for $7,500, and a Shadowless Gyarados, also in PSA 10, sold for $3,872. A couple of cards from Fossil set. Here's a first edition Aerodactyl, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,440. And then we saw 2 first edition Raichus from Fossil. This one here sold for $1,975. The other one sold for $2,025. Here is an unlimited Dragonite holo that sold for $3,050 this week. From Gym Heroes, we saw this unlimited Sabrina's Gengar that sold for $3,950. And I'm pretty sure this is a very low pop card because of all that beautiful holofoil that is so easily scratched. We also saw the Misty's Golduck, another low pop holo from WotC. This is from Gym Challenge. This sold for $2,225. Here is a first edition Shining Magikarp from Neo Revelation, sold as a PSA 10 for an even $5,000. And then a few cards from the E-Series. Here is a Gyarados holo from Skyridge, sold as a Gem Mint 10 for $4,002. Here is a holo Tyranitar from Expedition, sold for $2,900. And then we saw this PSA 9, a Crystal Charizard from Skyridge that sold for $9,800. And it's so crazy because this card as a PSA 10 was selling last year for this amount. Now the PSA 9s are selling for almost $10,000. Wild. And then we saw this PSA 10 Reverse Holo Crystal Charizard that sold for $5,830. We saw a couple of reverse holos from Legendary Collection. Here's a reverse holo Articuno in PSA 10 that sold for $3,186. Here's the reverse holo Charmander, sold for $4,050. The reverse holo Dark Vaporeon sold for $4,050 as well. And then we saw the PSA 10 reverse holo Dark Blastoise that sold for $6,700. Up next, we have several old school EX cards. Here is a Groudon EX Black Star promo as a PSA 10, sold for $1,905. Here we have a Blaziken EX from Team Magma versus Team Aqua, sold for $3,030. Here is a Rockets Caesar EX from EX Team Rocket Returns, a set that's been blowing up recently. This card sold for $2,325, along with the Rockets Mewtwo EX, sold for an even $7,000. Here from Unseen Forces was the Steelix EX that sold for $1,975, along with the Lugia EX, also from Unseen Forces, sold for $8,001. A couple of interesting Gold Star sales. Here is a Gold Star Suicune from Unseen Forces, sold as a PSA 10 for $3,150. And it's crazy because the legendary beasts from this set, those Gold Star copies, were always the cheapest of the Gold Stars. This card used to sell for like $1,000 for the longest time, now over $3,000. Here is a PSA 8 Gold Star Rayquaza from Deoxys, sold for $11,201. Here we have a reverse holo Gengar from EX Legend Maker, sold for $1,925, along with this reverse holo Mew, also from Legend Maker, sold for $2,900. We saw one level X card, and it was this Lucario level X from Diamond and Pearl Mysterious Treasures, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $2,505. And then from Platinum Set, we saw this holo Giratina sell as a PSA 10 for $2,655. We saw another Suicune come by. This one was from Call of Legends. and it sold as a PSA 10 for $2,861. And then on to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block. We saw this Holo Tyranitar once again from Expedition sell for $2,640. Here is a first edition Wigglytuff from Jungle that sold for an even $3,000 this week. Here is another Gyarados from Skyridge. However, this one is a CGC 10 pristine copy, sold for $3,840. Here is another Black Label Charizard GX from Hidden Fates. This one sold for $4,200. Here is a base set Japanese Charizard that sold as a PSA 10 for $4,920. Another first edition Shining Magikarp that sold for $5,280. Here we have a PSA 10 Holo Gengar from Legendary Collection. Not the reverse holo, the regular holo that sold for $5,640. And then we saw yet again another first edition Dark Charizard from Team Rocket set. This week it sold for an even $6,000, along with the first edition Blaine's Charizard from Gym Challenge that sold for $7,500. Charizard is making one heck of a comeback this week. Here is a Holo Misaki Alakazam promo in PSA 10 that sold for $7,800. Here is a Japanese Crystal Lugia in PSA 10 that sold for $8,700. And then, the PSA 10 Full Art Mario Pikachu, so close to reaching $10,000 in auction this week, selling for $9,900. So, man, it's got to happen next week, right? It's going to be over $10,000 in auction. Man. Up next, we have this Holo Charizard from Expedition. Sold as a PSA 10 this week for $11,700. And what's really funny about this card, folks, if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you'll remember, but if not, let me take you down memory lane. This card used to be available on a platform called Liquid Marketplace. It was Logan Paul's. He's like a partner with this platform where you could buy fractional shares of Pokemon cards. And I will never forget, they advertised this PSA 10 Charizard had a market value of $166,320. Folks, this card has never come close, remotely close to that price. I think it got as high as $17,400 at one point, but yeah, never a six-figure card. Here is a Japanese Crystal Charizard that sold as a PSA 10 for $13,200. Here we have a PSA 10 Gold Star Espeon from the Pop Series 5, sold for an even $18,000. And then the auction of the week we're going to have to give to this Trophy Kangaskhan. Got a PSA 6.5. Very odd grade, but still sold for $38,400 this week. That's it for the recap, folks. Stay tuned for next week's recap. It's going to blow your mind. We have so much stuff coming through. Very interesting. I thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around to the very end. I'll catch you all in my next one.